This is a GK Media podcast. Michael Dargie, CEO of Make More Creative, an agency he has had for over 20 years in Canada, and author of the upcoming book on business and branding called Brand Jitsu. Thank you so much for joining me on Garry Talks.
Oh, thanks for having me, Gary. This is awesome.
This is an area that I think so many people in business don't focus enough on. And it's 7 years down the road, if they're, lucky enough to be that long in business, that there's suddenly this panic of we need to sort out our brand. We need to sort out our image, our core values, our message. And it's nearly like starting from scratch again. Whereas if people can focus on getting their brand correct from the get-go, it makes a huge difference. Talk to me about why branding is so important.
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a great setup because I've always been an advocate that branding should be the first thing that you do. And it seems kind of counterintuitive because a lot of businesses are like, well, I just need to go sell a widget. I got to do a thing. And I'm showing up and I'm just at least, I'm getting it out there into the world. And branding to me is all about storytelling. And if you don't know the story that you're telling, then you can go all these different directions until you finally find the sweet spot. But wouldn't it be great if you could do that in the beginning, like start the process right? I'll give you an example. The process that I use, this Brand Jitsu book that you mentioned, the idea is to go from meh to memorable. So to go from this kind of like a wishy-washy, I'm not really sure what we're doing, to a brand that sticks in your mind. And the best way I can describe this is it's like, I call it the world's cheesiest metaphor, which is highlighted in the book where, it's an iceberg. And boy, like 9.5 times out of 10, when I meet a client, they're like, hey, Dargie, I'd really like a new logo, or I'd like to have a website, or, do this material. That's all stuff above the surface. Call it, the penguin layer, right? Of the iceberg. It's the stuff that everybody can see. It's the stuff that we work on first because we get an immediate, endorphin hit. Pardon me. But the problem is that what matters is down below the surface. And I'll use this as an example. So I perform with a theater company called Loose Moose Theater. And it's one of the sort of two founding improvisational theaters in the world. There was like Loose Moose based out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, in 1977. Then there was the IO Theater in Chicago. Del Close was the guy that ran that. So short form improv versus long form improv. But when you do improvisation and you walk on stage, you've got no idea what story you're going to tell. And the audience has no clue what story they're going to see. So one of the founders of Loose Moose, Keith Johnstone, would say that you have basically 30 seconds where you can do whatever you want on stage and the audience will be with you. But after that 30 seconds, they're going to need to know where the story could go. And he calls that building the platform. And if you build a platform for the scene, it's like, who are you? Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? And what's your relationship? If you can get those 5 things, the audience suddenly understands where the story can go. The circle of expectations has been set. So if I walk on stage with you, Gary, and I'm like doing this, I'm like, hey, Gary, have you seen Dad? And, if you're listening to this on the podcast and not watching it on video, I was just digging a hole. Gary and I are digging a hole. And, but literally in those 2 seconds, 3 seconds, that Gary and I are brothers, right? We're outside, we're digging a hole. So we understand where the story could potentially go. And once we have that platform set, we can then tilt the platform or create an emotional exchange. So maybe Gary goes, oh, I thought you had him. So suddenly we're like, oh my God, where's Dad? Like what happened to Dad? Is Dad okay? Right. So now we've got a story to tell. So I took this concept and I was trying to think, like, what is a platform for a brand? What's the first thing we need to know, that we need to understand about a brand, so that we can start building on it? And, basically what's the lowest common denominator? And it is brand DNA, which is What do you do? Why do you do it? Who do you do it for? And why do they care? If you can answer those 4 questions right from the very beginning, then you can build a brand, because you're always going to be testing back against those 4 things, that DNA. So when we go to the brand promise, when we go up to the brand personality, how do you show up in the world? How do you walk, talk, act? Who do you attract? Who do you repel? Then, that's one layer, the brand personality. And then above that, of course, is your customer, or the hero of the story, the person that you're, they're in pain and you're helping them get out of pain. Regardless what your business is, that's kind of what it boils down to. This hurts, make it stop hurting. And, that's your customer. And then above that is the stuff that you sell, the product or a service or a combination thereof. And once you have all that sorted, you can burst through the surface like a majestic narwhal, and now you can build your logo. And your
can we just break down those 4 things, though?
Sure.
The DNA that you mentioned. Can we break down those 4 things a little bit further to make people, do a little bit of a deep dive themselves and have a think about it for their own business?
Yeah, that's great.
The first one again.
What do you do? And I'll use, I'll use a somewhat famous example. And not that I worked with this company at all, just to, put this out there. But if we look back at Nike, back in the early days of Nike, back when they were even Blue Ribbon Sports, right? So Bill Bowerman and Philip Knight had a company called Blue Ribbon Sports, where basically Bill sold his shoe designs, and they made these shoes. I think it was like Tiger was the company that was making the shoes back then. Anyway, if we were to reverse engineer the Nike brand and went back in time to when it went from Blue Ribbon Sports to Nike, and we said, what did they do? Back then, they made shoes. Full stop. And this is how clear we need to get on the what do you do part. We don't need to be like the best running shoes. The what do you do needs to be simple, clear, concise, devoid of all marketing spin. So we make shoes. Now that's no longer the case. They make a lot of stuff now, but let's go back in time. So, what do you do, Garry? You share stories, right? So I think that's, if you can get that clear and that decisive, then you've got something to build on, and you're not going to get distracted by the shiny things.
No, because like we do, if you break it down into services, we do videos, we do podcasts, we do social media management, we do graphic design. They're kind of the 4 key things of what we do. And then the other element of the business that we're setting up is, we're focusing more on shorts, docs, and features. Yeah. But it's all storytelling. All it is at the end of the day. And it's true to keep it that simple.
Yeah. Well, because that way, if you stop telling stories or you start doing a thing that is not storytelling, you're off brand, right? And this is just one of the best ways. Like I get chills even just talking about it, because I think it's that important, because suddenly that, is what we're doing telling stories? No, off brand. We need to realign, get back to it.
I'm glad you said that, because just before we hopped on this meeting, I sent an email to someone who was looking for us to do a project for them, and it's not what we do. And as a business owner, you hate to say no to money on the table. But I was going with my gut, and I was like, I'm dreading getting involved in this project more than actually excited and feeling challenged. And as I kept breaking it down, it's like, if we did this project, it takes us further away from where we want to go, what our goal is, and so on. And simply put, it's nothing got to do with storytelling.
Yeah. It is the greatest gift I think a business can have, is that amount of clarity. The next question, of course, is why do you do it? And this goes back to your purpose. And I've always found, like, we do this one-on-one with CEOs and founders, and what I find almost to the one is that the reason why they did it and started in the first place is deeply personal. And I think, the more clear you can get on your reason why, like your purpose behind sharing these stories, as an example, or Bill Bowerman, as a track coach for University of Oregon, why did he do it? Why was he making shoes? He quite famously made shoes underneath the bleachers of the Oregon track and field stadium, using his wife's waffle maker. Why did he do that? because he was designed to help his athletes perform better. Like his entire reason for being was to help his athletes perform better in life. Like he helped his athletes get jobs at the lumber mill. Why? So they could realize that they shouldn't work in a lumber mill. They need to, work harder in school or be better and more successful in other areas. Not that there's anything wrong, people with working in a lumber mill, other than it's really hard, toxic work. So then he'd make these shoes, and he suffered health consequences by making these rubber shoes with his wife's waffle maker. But again, in service of helping his athletes perform better. That was his why. You could ask why Philip Knight did it as well. And, he believed that, everybody should be a runner. And again, I'm not Philip Knight. I don't know Philip Knight. I read his book, Shoe Dog, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah.
But I mean, so what is your why? Why do you do it? And as soon as you land on that, and I think you said something very interesting where you're like, this company that you said no to, you weren't excited about. And I think that's a really great, that's a litmus test where you can be like, if I'm not excited about this, if I'm not going to wake up every morning and be like stoked to do this thing, what am I doing? Because I'm not going to give my best to this client. And that sounds off brand for Garry, right?
Yeah.
Again,
and it's off brand,
test.
and it's probably off your core value then as well, even if you don't know what they are.
Yeah.
And something I find that's really good in knowing your why is we can all give a surface level answer as to what our why is, but then ask yourself a why to that. Yeah. And then you'll have a different answer, maybe a deeper answer, and then why that as well. Like nearly do it 5 times, and then you're breaking it down into really from the gut what your why really is.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And the more you, once you run out of reasons, once you can no longer ask the question why, once you hit on that truth, that's a gift, right? Because then again, it's another way to test whether you're on brand or off brand. And should you do this or should you not? It's clear and concise. And this is why I think it's so important to start with brand right in the beginning. Now, if you haven't, like if companies are listening to this, they're just like, I'm 5 years down the road and I got to rethink my brand. Sure. That's a pivot. Even if you don't have a strong brand, you're still going to pivot it and tweak it. You can still go back down to call it the anglerfish layer, below the tip of the iceberg at the bottom of the ocean floor. Figure out your purpose, figure out your values, work on the DNA, which is those 4 questions, and then start seeing how it changes, how it ripples through everything that you do. And you might realize that your logo of, a dire wolf is not appropriate. Maybe it should be a bunny rabbit. I don't know.
When I started off in business, I was nearly trying to mimic what I perceived as cool or something then, rather than looking inwards and seeing what is the image that is truly me, rather than what is the image that I want to project.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There's years ago, we were doing a show at Loose Moose Theater. It's called Maestro, Crash and Burn Improv. So basically you start with 14 improvisers, and there's basically at random, you do scenes together. The audience votes and gives you a score. And at the end of each round, the lowest scoring improvisers get kicked off the stage, right? Until basically at the end of the night, there's only...
So cruel.
Oh, it's savage. Yeah. At the end of the night, there's only one improviser who wins, called the Maestro. And long story short, it was, there's 3 of us left. It's the end of the night, closing in on the end of the night. And this other fella and I, we get up to do a scene together. And I couldn't tell you for the life of me what that scene was, but we scored a 4 out of 5. So we were good. And I'm just like, oh yeah, we're going to go to the finals. It's going to be awesome. I'm super excited because I'm highly competitive. And then a good friend of mine, Jen Bain, goes up and does a solo scene. So it's the 3 of us, myself, this other guy, and Jen Bain. Jen goes up and does a scene all by herself. And just to paint this picture, it's a full house. So, call it 150 people in the theater. She asks for a couch from backstage. And a spotlight. So a spotlight right on the center stage, there's like a couch there. She walks out of the spotlight into the darkness over to her purse and comes back with a puppet of a dog. So Jen lies down on the couch and she puts a dog on her chest, and Jen goes to sleep on the couch in the middle of this audience. And the dog sort of snuggles in and the audience laughs because it's so charming. But the dog notices. So the dog, like has a look at the audience, and that makes the audience laugh louder. And the dog, like the tail starts wagging, and it's moving so much and it's so excited that it starts to disturb Jen's sleep. So Jen starts to stir, and then the dog looks back at Jen, and now, is it playtime? Is it time to get up? Like, this is so awesome. 5 minutes, Garry. This scene went on. Not one word was spoken. It was just a slice of life.
Brilliant.
And again, chills, right? So the lights come down, the audience explodes. She gets a 5 out of 5. She wins the entire night. And, what I learned in that moment is how important truth is. And what she gave to us was a memorable scene, something that I will not forget for the rest of my life. And it's been years, and it's still fresh as the moment that it happened. And the reason why it was so impactful was because it was true. Because if you're a dog owner or a pet owner of any sort, you understood that what happened there was real, even though it was a puppet. Anyway, and she's a fascinating performer to watch, and she's like an extraordinary puppeteer. Because she just brought this world to life for us.
And it is to accept the truth then, really, as to what is your why, because you'll feel it in your gut when you've reached it.
Absolutely.
You will know when you have reached it. So what is the next thing then in terms of, your brand? So,
who you do it for.
We focused on,
what do you do? Why do you do it? Who do you do it for? And this is fairly simple in some cases, and there can be more than one constituent that you do this for. But I like to say, let's just focus on the most important one. In your world, is it business owners that get the most out of the stories that you share? Or is it, entrepreneurs? Is it captains of industry? I would suggest that, that you probably have a sweet spot audience where people are just like, this Garry speaks directly to me. In terms of Nike, just to bring them back, athletes. That's who they did it for. And they quite famously said, and it's in the brand, the brand promise is that if you have a body, like it's to inspire, innovate athletes all over the world, with little asterisks beside athletes. And it says in parentheses, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And I think that that's a really important distinction, or thing to understand, that that's who they're serving, is athletes. And guess what? We all are, if we have this body. So, who do you do
in
it
January
for?
We are. We're athletes in January when we do our New Year's resolution, and then and it's to understand as well. That you're not for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, and that's such a huge gift. Again, another gift is that you don't have to serve everyone, and you don't have to be all things to all people. And that's outstanding, because if you're so broad, you stop being memorable, because you're not able to speak directly to the soul of the person that you're hoping to connect with. And then of course the last one is, why do they care? And I've always felt that the why you do it and why they care are intricately connected. Like, it is, you can't have one without the other. And in the case of Nike, why do they do it? Well, Bill Bowerman did it to support athletic performance. Like, he did all of this to improve athletic performance. Why does the athlete care? Because it worked. Because it did improve their performance. It reduced injury. It gave them the energy that they needed, et cetera, et cetera. Like, ad infinitum, it worked in the end. So, Nike makes shoes to improve athletic performance. Period. Full stop. That's the unvarnished truth of the Nike brand back when it first launched. And then they quite famously had this, one of their first ads was, there is no finish line. which is a lone runner running down a road. And if you're a runner, or if you're, heck, even a musician, you know that as soon as you stop practicing, as soon as you stop showing up, you notice in 2 days, the audience is going to notice, but like, there is no finish line. You run through those finish lines. You don't stop when you get there, right? You keep moving forward. It's such an impactful, truthful thing. And I mean, really, I think that campaigns like that, and even the brand name Nike, the goddess of victory, it speaks truth throughout the entire brand. You can pull that truth all the way through it, because everything that they do is in service of that. How they treated Colin Kaepernick, when he, took a knee during the national anthem, and how they treated him afterwards and supported him as a trailblazer and somebody who stood up for, other people. They stood up, with him. Yeah. Right. So it's like all these little moments of truth throughout their journey. And you're like, wow, it matters.
So how do you bring all those conclusions into an actual physical visual brand?
That's a great question. So there's, along with the book are a series of worksheets. So I'm a big believer in physically seeing these things show up. When I work with a client, and you can do it on your own too, you go download these worksheets. I'll do a little shameless plug. Go to brandjitsu.com and, see what's there, sign up for the book when it gets released. But the idea being that you take a Post-it note and you've got 4 boxes. What do you do? Why do you do it? Who do you do it for? Why do they care? Take some Post-it notes. Fill out what you think you do. It has to fit on a Post-it note. That's number 1. So only one idea per Post-it note. And fill that box. Oh my God, I would say the most Post-it notes I've had in the what do you do box is probably 60, 70, working with the client to just figure out what it is that they do. Now, the idea though, is you put all those things up there because you got to work through it, right? What do? We make track shoes, best shoes, blah, blah, blah. You have to only have one at the end. You can only have one Post-it note in each box at the end of the process, but you have to brain dump everything to get to the truth of what do you do. You got to brain dump everything to get to the truth of why you do it. And it's not just, to make money. Okay. That's table stakes, yeah, but why? Like, what is it? And again, you can see on the site, I have examples of what the worksheet would look like once you fill it full of Post-it notes. And it's extraordinary exercise. Just figuring out those 4 questions has taken, and this is like guided with a CEO and COO. Typically, the founders are who I work with at that stage. Can take 4 to 6 hours just to answer those 4 questions. But once you have those 4 questions answered, you boil it into the unvarnished truth, which is a simple declarative sentence, which now becomes the thing that you test your brand against at every other step along the way.
Because I think as well, when you start out in business, you are trying nearly everything to see what works, what has a bit of bite. And then sometimes you go down roads you didn't intend to go down. Yeah. And a few years later, you're saying, actually, who are we? Yeah. And what do we do? Or what do we want to do?
One of the nice things about doing this process, like going through the entire process, is at the end of it, like if you did it with us, for example, and there's another tool out there called Storyscope, like on the Brand Jitsu website, where you can sort of do self-serve, but you can get a brand playbook at the end, which then has basically all of these questions answered in a book form that you can then go back and rework a year down the road, or come back and do it again 2 years down the road. So you can basically use this as here's the line in the sand, here's where we are today. And then a year down, 2 years down, whatever, you come back and do it again, be like, okay, what's changed? What's shifted? And there's, again, you'll see it on the site. We sometimes use dots, like little colored dots along a spectrums, depending on what worksheet you're working on. When you go back and do that work again, you're going to see where the dots are placed differently. And now you can see the lever that maybe you pushed or pulled that caused this new effect or caused a new brand personality trait to show up, and how that affected your business. Like it's a way for you to clearly see how you're showing up and how you can change those things.
Perfect. And just come back then to what I was asking earlier about, when you have one answer to each of those 4 points, how do you turn that then into like a logo or something recognizable as a brand?
Yeah, another great question. When you go from call it find, shape, and share your story. These are the different levels of the iceberg. Find your story is the bottom piece where you're working on the DNA and your unvarnished truth, your brand ethos, like who you are as a business. Right above that in the shape your story section is your brand personality. So this is, are you masculine, feminine? Are you elite or mass appeal? Are you conventional? Are you rebel? All these questions that you can answer. Brand archetypes. Are you the outlaw and the explorer? Are you like, what combination of these things are you? What story are you in? There's only 7 stories that have ever been told, right? So are you like in a journey and return story? Are you, in an overcoming the monster story at the moment? All these things add flavor to shape your brand personality in service of the hero of the story, which is your customer, presumably. And what do they get out of their relationship with you? And I think once you understand your brand personality, like you get your brand DNA, you're going to be like, okay, I think I'm a tiger. But then you get into your brand personality and you're just like, oh, I'm actually a jackalope. Right? Like it could completely change based on the brand personality that you're presenting and how you show up in the world. That will then translate into how you figure out the logo. Like what then resonates as an iconography. Like how did Nike come up with the swoosh? Well, it was one of, I think, 3 or 4 designs that a friend of Philip Knight's designed that they paid $30 for, and he was just like, I don't love it, but I'm sure it'll grow on me. Right. But it's become one of the most iconic symbols because it's used consistently. It tells, the story, it's action in its most simplest form. What more does it need to be? Does it need to say goddess of victory? No, but it needs to allude to the fact that it is always in motion. It's always, it's kinetic, right? Which is kind of what Nike is. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. And I just think, for people who are listening to this, by getting your brand right from as early as you can, it helps so much with making decisions and attracting the right audience for yourself. Some people say, oh, we'll just keep putting stuff up on social media, so we're branding. But it's like, yeah, but what message are you branding? Is that the message you want to brand? So for instance, I remember someone was giving off before saying, no, we're really trying to get in with SMEs. And, it's more public sector work we're getting and a lot of stuff from schools and so on. And I said, show me the content that you're putting out. And it was all stuff with kids that they were, different workshops they were doing with kids and so on. It's like, it's completely misaligns with who you're trying to attract, because you keep putting out information saying we're doing this workshop with kids and this other workshop with children and so on. Of course, it's not going to attract SMEs. And yes, your name might be out there, but it mightn't be branding the message that you want to attract the audience that you want and so on. And you might be getting currently money from doing workshops with children, but is that what you want? Is that what drives you and so on? So you need to do a lot of soul searching to figure out exactly what it is that drives you and what way you want to take your business, and then brand that consistently.
Absolutely.
So the message is clear.
Yeah. Yeah, just to jump on the tail end of that too, is the understanding that it's not about you, that it's about the customer. And if you can identify the pain that the SME is in, or the thing that they need, in order to be successful, then you can speak to that story, as opposed to, showing up a different story or being like, we are great at doing this. Our workshops are awesome. We help you do this. As soon as I start hearing those we, or our, I'm just getting talked at, and I stop caring, because it's not about me. You know what I mean? Like, as a customer, I want it to be all about me, and you better tell my story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So there was someone recently who was going through websites doing an audit, and it was that thing of, look at this website, it's all about how great we are, and we're doing this and we're doing that. Yeah. And he said, now look at this website, and it was all about how they can solve your pain as such, the solutions they can bring to you as a potential customer.
Yeah. That's money right there. That's the magic secret sauce.
Michael is a podcaster as well. I'm following his podcast on Spotify. So Rebel, make one word out of it, Rebel, and with Michael Dargie, and you'll easily find it on Spotify. And his new book, which is called Brand Jitsu, From Meh to Memorable, I love it, is coming out, right, hopefully April next year, but they've already started the registration process for it. So all you have to do is go to his website, brandjitsu.com, register your interest, and get more information as well about what Michael is doing. Make More Creative is his company in Calgary, Canada. And as I said as well, Rebel is the podcast. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today on Garry Talks.
Garry, this has been outstanding. Thanks so much for having me. You're a great host.